Morning all. I hope I can just see the numbers starting to tick up slowly as the system lets everybody in. So I'll just give this a few seconds just to make sure everybody's got through the system. Hope you're all doing well today. I was thinking this morning that wouldn't it be nice if this was in person, but actually I'm starting to wonder if the organisers sort of had some future gazing and knowledge about these train strikes that are happening at the moment. So they've actually timed it perfectly with a webinar this for today. Great, I can see the numbers are ticking up nicely now. So let me begin. I'd like to start by saying it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And thank you very much for inviting me to chair this session. It's an absolute honour. And we've got an absolutely wonderful lineup of speakers from, a vast array of variety of backgrounds. And I think that's fantastic in terms of what we need to be able to talk about this subject, which, as we know today, is all about practical solutions to reducing emissions and improving air quality. And when we talk about improving air quality, we can't think of there being one silver bullet. We need to look across the piece, whether that's policy, behavioural change, or even design and planning for better futures and better cities. All of that needs to come together really in order to provide the solutions that are required and actually make the big differences that are going to not only improve people's health, but improve people's well-being, improve people's mental health as well. So it's a huge range of things that can be seen as co-benefits when you improve air quality. It's not just going to be air quality. You can obviously link in carbon and the importance there, but also everything that's going to come together, whether or not it's creating new parklets for biodiversity, getting rid of car parking spaces, for instance, controversial perhaps, but it's something that's being done. So I'd like to keep us on time today, and so I'm going to start shortly introducing our first speaker, but also just to give a little bit of housekeeping, I suppose. It'd be great if you could all interact with us during the session today, and we'd like you to do that by adding comments and questions into the QA box, which you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom screen. It would be better to use that rather than the chat function. So if you could do that, that would be much appreciated. I'd like to hand over for the first talk of the day to Brendan Manon, who is Head of Air Quality Strategy Review at Defra. Brendan's been leading Defra's review of the air quality strategy, which is due to be published in May next year. And prior to his work on the air quality strategy, Brendan was one of the deputy bill managers taking the Environment Act through Parliament, responsible for air, water and nature. So Brendan, absolute pleasure to see you here today. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, James. Good morning, everyone. So I'll just quickly attempt to share my screen. Hopefully this works. Right, is that working? James, I can only see James.
Perfect, that's working. Brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, great. So yes, this morning we're going to talk about the Environment Act and the reforms that it put in place for air quality specifically. So I think we've got about 20 minutes, and I think probably the best use of that time is probably Q&A mostly. So I'll just kind of rattle through some slides quite quickly, and then I'm happy to take questions. As I said, I think that's probably the sort of the best value. So at a high level, the Environment Act kind of brought into being three main areas of reform for air quality. Obviously, the kind of most high profile is the environmental targets that the Act requires, including obviously one specifically for PM2.5 concentration, and another long-term target in addition to that. We're consulting on the environmental targets at the moment, and the consultation closes on Monday. So do respond to that if you haven't already. The next kind of tranche of changes was around local air quality and the LAQM framework. that introduced things like air quality partners, strengthen the status of air quality action plans where there's a problem that needs to be solved. We've issued, we've consulted rather on revised guidance under that, and that also requires us to bring forward a new air quality strategy, which I'll talk about in detail in a moment. And then lastly, it kind of made changes to the Clean Air Act 1993, which it puts in place restrictions on domestic burning, and the Environment Act improved the enforcement that's available, the enforcement tools available to local authorities where the smoke control areas. And we've either got any guidance out or it'll be out very shortly to local authorities on that as well. Oops, too far. So yeah, in detail, then the Environment Act targets, as I say, we were required to set targets in at least 4 priority areas, in addition to a concentration target for PM2.5. What we've chosen to do is bring forward or propose 2 targets, both relating to PM2.5, and our rationale for that is that PM2.5 is the pollutant with the most impact on human health. So we wanted to tackle that. It's also kind of the, if you like, the final destination for a lot of other air pollutants. So obviously ammonia, you know, it becomes ammonium nitrate, which is PM2.5. And so it's also kind of quite a good proxy for a number of different pollutants. The 2 proposed targets that we are consulting on at the moment, firstly, the concentration target is an annual mean concentration of 10 micrograms to be met by 2040. And I'll talk about in the next slide how we'll assess progress and compliance with that. And then the second is quite, as far as we're aware, quite a novel type of target, which is around population exposure reduction. And we want to reduce people's exposure by 35% by 2040 compared to 2018 levels. And as I say, the consultation is running at the moment and closes on Monday. So in terms of how we'll assess compliance, Defra has a network of monitors around the country called the Automatic Urban and Rural Network. You can see here on the map the sites. Blue is urban, and kind of sort of burgundy, I guess, colour is the rural sites. And these are just PM2.5 sites on this map. There's a lot more that measure other pollutants. Compliance with the annual mean concentration target will be met if none of these sites are over 10 averaged over the year in 2040. The population exposure reduction target is based on the average of all of the sites, which are representative of population exposure in England. So we'll take those sites, average them over 3 years, and then we will have met the target if the exposure is 35% lower in 2040 than it was in 2018. We're expanding the network quite significantly. We've opened 13 new sites already, specifically for PM2.5, and we're continuing to significantly invest in the network. I'm not sure if numbers are exactly confirmed yet, but I think it's roughly double the number of PM2.5 monitors that will be in place after the expansion as compared to before. So it is quite a significant investment and expansion in the monitoring capability. So moving on to local air quality management, I'll go through some of the other reforms in a second, but one of the main things that the changes that the Environment Act did was strengthen the role of air quality action plans, which are put in place by local authorities when they have to declare an air quality management area because of concentration problems. And at the moment, there's quite a few examples of air quality action plans which get made and then just sort of sit there on the shelf and don't really get delivered. So our intention was to strengthen that so that the plans get delivered. As part of that, we have we've consulted on revised guidance for local authorities. The last guidance was published in 2016, so obviously it's been quite a few years since we've updated that. We've as I say, consulted on that, and the consultation closed, I think, a few weeks ago, and we'll be issuing a government response and new guidance relatively soon on that for local authorities. So some of the changes that we've made in the new guidance include, as I say, local air quality strategies or action plans, and kind of improving those. Also changes around local air quality management reporting and compliance, and how making it easier basically for local authorities to report to Defra on what they're doing. We tried to beef up the role of public health professionals at a local level, and encourage cooperation with them. We also, as I say, tried to sort of change the status of air quality management areas and air quality action plans, and really drive improvements at a local level with those, by beefing up the kind of requirement for them to be delivered. There's also quite a lot on regional collaboration. So one of the major changes that the Environment Act brought in was to introduce the concept of air quality partners, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But one of the key kind of relationships that we are trying to build is between the district and county, where there's a two-tier system in place, and also between neighbouring local authorities, because very often, well, in all cases, the duty to improve air quality sits at kind of the lower level, but some of the policy levers to improve it might sit at the sort of upper tier, particularly around things like transport. And then obviously, you know, when you emit air pollution, it doesn't stay in the same place. So also, we've sort of beefed up neighbouring collaboration as well, in the role of producing action plans. We also included some new stuff on public access to air quality information by local authorities, and making sure that local communities are engaged when plans are made, and also improved the material in the guidance on reduction of disparities, because air pollution tends to disproportionately affect certain groups, and so we wanted to kind of tackle that if we can, or get local authorities to tackle that. We've also included a section on indirect quality. We've beefed up the wording on PM2.5, and also on ammonia, which obviously, as I alluded to earlier, you know, forms secondary PM2.5 in the atmosphere after it's been emitted. Also included wording on planning and building regs, trying to get co-benefits from climate change policies, net zero policies that local authorities put in place, and try and relieve some of the tensions perhaps that do sometimes arise, particularly around things like biomass burning, which obviously, you know, is low carbon, but can contribute to air pollution, and try and sort of surface some of those tensions. We've also highlighted the support that the government gives to local authorities, particularly around the air quality grant, and we always kind of want to improve that process going forward. There's also something called the Air Quality Hub, which some people on the call might be familiar with, but it's essentially a locally led kind of website, which Defra funded, but has been built by a group of local authorities, which is really, really helpful and really useful. So we kind of highlighted that. And then finally, we've included some new wording around the data dashboard that local authorities submit their kind of reporting on. So next, this is a very wordy slide, but I'll rattle through. So as I said, one of the things that the bill has done is introduce air quality partners who have to work together to produce plans to solve air quality problems where they arise. One of the things that we can do is designate relevant public authorities, which kind of act as an air quality partner where there is a problem. Air quality partners are expected to kind of provide solutions, you know, where there's a problem that was within their control, and then deliver on those solutions. The local authority can't sort of dictate to an air quality partner what they expect to happen, and our intention there is that the air quality partner or a relevant public authority will be the expert in their responsibilities, and bring forward solutions. There is a reserve power for the Secretary of State to direct an air quality partner to do more where that's needed. So the first air quality partner or relevant public authority that we're looking at is National Highways. We consulted in parallel with the guidance a couple of months ago on that. The intention is, as I've put here on the slide, 43 air quality management areas we've identified as being, mainly caused by emissions from the strategic road network, which is National Highways kind of remit. And there's probably others as well where emissions from the strategic road network do contribute to other AQMAs as well. But these 43 that we've identified are kind of the main cause is the strategic road network. So as I say, we've consulted on that designation. If we do designate them, I don't want to preempt the outcome of the consultation, but I can't see why we wouldn't. That will mean that if a local authority has an AQMA, one of these 43, where they say, look, we think there's a problem here that's caused by the strategic road network, National Highways will have to come to the table and kind of propose some solutions to get this solved. So it should drive action really at a very granular local level. So moving on then, one of the other things that the Environment Act 2021 did was amend the Environment Act 1995, the last time we had one. In the 95 Act, there's an obligation on the government to have a strategy. The last strategy that we had was this one here, 2007. So it's been quite a long time since we've updated it, and obviously quite a lot has happened since then, in the world of air quality with sort of emission ceilings and various directives as well. So we wanted to update it. So we included a commitment in the Environment Act 2021 to update that strategy within 12 months of measures coming into force. So that means by the 1st of May next year, 2023. And then we have to review every 5 years after that and publish a new version if we think we need to. So the revised strategy, our intention for it, and this is all subject to consultation and so on, but our kind of thinking at this stage, we really wanted to bring together the kind of local and national policy frameworks and explain how they work together, because we've obviously got the national concentration limits, but there's also the local ones which are the same numbers but actually slightly different legal framework. So we really want to clarify how they work together. We also want to empower local authorities to act, setting out exactly why this matters, why local politicians, local councillors should care about this and should bring forward policies. We'll be reviewing sort of objectives at a local level, and we want to develop a stronger a sort of capability building framework for local action, so really helping local authorities with practical tools that they can use. And as I alluded to earlier, as we've put in the guidance, we'd like to put in the strategy a kind of reduction of disparities caused by or exacerbated by air pollution, to try and reduce some of the disproportionate impacts that air pollution does have on vulnerable groups and communities. And then we'd also like to kind of highlight co-benefits, particularly for around sort of net zero. So how if you put in place a policy for net zero, how can you realise the best air quality benefit, but also around things like biodiversity duty that local authorities or public authorities have, because air pollution doesn't just affect humans, it also can have pretty bad impacts on sensitive habitats and so on. And then the sort of third area that I mentioned earlier is around domestic burning, smoke control areas. So the Act, Environment Act 2021, amended the Clean Air Act 1993 to make enforcement of smoke control areas much easier. We did decriminalise technically the offences in the 1993 Act, but that means that actually it's much more easy for local authorities to enforce, much more flexible. I think we've heard of like one enforcement action taken under the 1993 Act in the last 10 years or something. So it was an extremely burdensome process that involved, magistrates' court and huge amount of time and effort by local authorities. The changes that we've made basically enable local authorities to just issue fines for non-compliance. So it's a much more streamlined process. And also there's now a duty for anyone who sells solid fuels to notify customers that they can only be used in certain places. So if you're selling wood, for example, that cannot be used in a smoke control area in an open fire. Wood can only be used in an approved device. So you have to be told that now when you buy fuel. We've also kind of separate to this wasn't quite under the Act, but we think it's a useful tool. We've developed a postcode checker and map for where all smoke control areas are, or our best guess, because many of them are kind of decades old. And local authorities have kind of provided us with this data. So you can go on Defra's UKR website and type in your postcode, your address, and it should come up with whether or not you're in a smoke control area. Because awareness of smoke control areas was pretty low, so we wanted to kind of use make a kind of easy to use tool. So you can see kind of lot distribution here. Obviously, London's pretty much entirely covered, and then lots in the sort of northwest as well. Okay, so I think that was all of the slides that I wanted to run through. I will attempt to look at the chat window here. To see, oh, there's no Q&A just yet. So yeah, I've got time for questions. If anyone would like to ask anything, please do pop it in the chat, the Q&A function. Were you going to share this bit, James?
Thank you, Brendan. Yes,
sure.
Fantastic. Wonderful talk. Appreciate that. So yes, while people hopefully had a few questions there for you, I have the luckily job that I'd be able to ask questions here. That's sort of chair's prerogative. So I thought I'd start with a question about practical solutions. I met with some colleagues of mine at Arup a few weeks ago, actually, with Joanna Averley, who's the Chief Planner at the Department for Levelling Up, and she was asking us about practical solutions for improving air quality and also focusing quite heavily on EV electric vehicles and their plans for moving and improving the EIA and SIA process. How do you feel things like air quality positive or policies along that type of approach may well come in future? Do you think that's something you'll be looking at?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, EVs is an interesting one because obviously tailpipe emissions go to zero, but kind of brake and tyre emissions still happen. By some estimates, they might be potentially a bit worse for EVs than they are for kind of traditional fossil fuel vehicles, although regional braking obviously is massively helpful. But yeah, I think really what we're trying to do at a strategic level is make sure that these kind of co-benefits or tensions, and EVs is a great example because, you know, there's kind of, you know, you've kind of got positives and negatives, really make sure that they're considered at a kind of strategic level and very early on in policy development, so that you can either kind of mitigate them or, you know, realize the biggest benefits. So particularly what we want to do with the strategy is make sure that those decisions and that thinking happens early on in policy development.
Fantastic, thank you. We've only got a minute, but let's rattle through some of these. So maybe quick fire. Do the new measures apply across the UK?
So they are England only. Air quality is devolved to the devolved nations. So it's England only.
We've talked about biomass burning. Have you included impacts from waste incinerators?
So waste incinerators are permitted usually by the Environment Agency or by the local authority if they're small, and we do that through the UK BAT process, which is Best Available Techniques. So there's a kind of separate regulatory regime for those, but we do expect that, you know, obviously the air quality impact of any new or even existing incinerator or similar thing would be considered by the local authority or by the Environment Agency.
Yeah, they would be included, wouldn't they? There's a question about the roles and responsibility for public health.
Yes, so really what we need to do is make sure that public health professionals are included in conversations about air quality early on, to make sure that they've kind of got you know, time to input and their expertise is considered when, you know, when making policies, making plans and that kind of thing.
Fantastic. I'd like to keep things on time today. Brendan, massive thanks for that fantastic talk. There's a few more questions in the Q&A. If you have a moment, it'd be fantastic if you could just type a quick reply to any of those that you have time for. But Fantastic, and thank you very much again.
Thanks very much.
Great. I'd like to hand over now to our next speaker. Catherine Brown is the Clean Air Zone Manager at Bath and North East Somerset Council, and she's been a key member of the project team since 2017, when the council was first directed by the government to put in place a clean air zone and build the business case for that. So having launched the first clean air zone outside of London in March 2021, Catherine's role has been leading the behavioural change enforcement and air quality management teams to bring about successful reduction in pollution in Bath. So thank you very much, Catherine. Look forward to hearing your talk on this topic.
Hello everyone, welcome from sunny Bath, I have to say, although I think there might be thunderstorms later. James, so can you see the screen? Let me just move everything. And
that is, I can see it. It's in, if you put it into presenter mode, then we should be all set.
There we go.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Right. As I said, hello everyone. My name's Catherine Brown. I'm the Clean Air Zone Manager here, and I've been working on this project for now 5 years. So I think that demonstrates how long it can take to introduce such a significant scheme as a clean air zone. Title of my slide there is Balancing the Carrot with the Stick, and I'll talk a little bit about that further on in the presentation. What I intend to do is to give you some information about our clean air zone in Bath, why we introduced it, some of the major challenges that we have come up against in introducing the zone and how we've overcome them. Our zone is now over a year in operation, so I'll give you some insight as to how it's performing. And then finally, I'll give you my thoughts and musings on how effective it's been in terms of its purpose of improving air quality and reducing nitrogen dioxide levels. So a little bit about the air quality situation here in Bath. I guess we are not unique. We declared an air quality management area in the centre of the city back in 2002, some 20 years ago now. And for someone who's been involved in environmental health and air quality for a career of 25 years, it's not been without the want of trying to reduce nitrogen dioxide levels here, but I think really the problem is so significant in terms of pollution from vehicles that it really needed a radical and significant intervention to bring about that change. So back in 2017, we were mandated by the government and directed to go through a business case development process to identify an option in terms of a clean air zone. And in one bullet point there, I have described what lasted some 3.5 years in terms of 2 extensive public consultation periods, many reports to our administration, and finally we decided that our solution that was going to get us to compliance was a Class C charging clean air zone, and I'll describe what that means on the next slide. And we introduced that on the 15th of March 2021, and if you cast your minds back to that time, you will remember that we were just coming out of the pandemic. Originally, we were due to launch in November 2020, but for obvious reasons, that was delayed. As I've said there, we have tried many options to try and improve our air quality in the city, but the step change that we really needed to get that improvement hadn't been achieved up until 2017. So, as I said, after public consultation, we introduced a Class C zone. And in introducing a clean air zone, obviously you've got to think about how you're going to improve air quality, but you've got to think about the impact of it. So the socio-economical financial impact of introducing a charging mechanism on a population. So our zone charges high polluting buses, coaches, HGVs. So the larger vehicles are charged £100 if they are not compliant and they want to drive in the zone. Smaller vehicles like taxis and vans, light goods vehicles, are charged £9. And we arrived on those charges through a stated preference survey we did early on in the business case development, sending out questionnaires to people, trying to understand what would be that level of charge that would be the tipping point that would make them change their behaviour. In terms of paying the charge, there is a payment window of 13 days, so you can pay up to 6 days in advance on the day of travel and then 6 days afterwards. So there is plenty of time to make that payment, and that in itself is what we would call a reasonable adjustment to give people flexibility in paying the charge. And as I've emphasised there, private cars and motorbikes are not charged, and it's interesting how many times we need to keep reiterating that. People do think that cars are charged as well, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. There we go. So our biggest challenge, if I'm honest, was trying to get the public on board. We had to take them with us. And as we all know, nitrogen dioxide is a pollutant that you can't see, you can't taste it, so you don't know it's there. And, you know, individuals will just be unaware of the impact that nitrogen dioxide can have on public health and the detrimental impact it can have. Maybe they don't own a car, they don't live near the zone, or they don't have a family member that may suffer any of these health impacts. And I've come to learn over the last year or so that clean air zones are a very different kind of intervention or charging regime. And they differ from perhaps the other charging regimes like the Dart Tunnel, for example, the Mersey Tunnel. With those regimes, you pay a charge and you immediately get the benefit. You get to go through the tunnel, you get to go over the bridge. With a clean air zone, you're paying a charge for something that you can't see, it's not tangible. You may not visit that particular city very often. You're paying a charge to try and bring about improvement in air quality in the future. And I think that's a real challenge for the public to understand. So our solution to try and overcome that is that we have unashamedly spent a lot of the budget that we got from government on consultation and engagement. And the graphic there shows our proposed boundary of our clean air zone at the start and how it ended up, and it changed 9 times over the course of the business case process. And that's really a testament to how we talk to people and how we listen to them, and we tweaked it. As I've said there, we very much tried to take a cup of tea approach with people. So as you can imagine, whole range of emotions, from being very angry to you're not going far enough. So we spoke to people, and I think people respected that. You know, they might not have agreed with us, but at least we were prepared to talk to them. And all the time we're trying to move people along that curve of them being in shock and denial through to getting to acceptance of understanding what the zone is about. We also spent a lot of money on contacting businesses and people affected, and that was a really good use of the money, if I'm honest. It got the message out to people. We've sent out postcards to every address, and we've really tried to maintain pressure on those that perhaps aren't directly affected. So car drivers, for example, we had a lot of feedback from people say, well, you're not charging cars, but they also need to take responsibility. So we took that on board as well. So yes, we have to carry out enforcement. So if you don't pay the charge, you get a penalty charge notice. And this is where I talk about the carrot and the stick. So if you have that enforcement, you need the carrot to go with it. So we have had a financial assistance scheme where we've provided grants and loans to people to bring forward the replacement of their vehicle to a compliant one. And we've also had an ambitious bus retrofitting program going on as well to ensure our bus fleet is compliant. We also brought in specialists because we're not specialists in finance. So in administering the scheme, we've got a board of financial providers and an expert that oversees that. We brought stakeholders together. So the big bus companies like First Bus, we brought them into the same room with the smaller operators so that they could learn from one another. And we've tried to be transparent all the way through. And for us, the enforcement is also another opportunity to push that behaviour change message. We tell people why we are doing this, and our ethos is that we are here to enforce, not just to penalise. Or that's the perception that the public might have. So a year in, we have been able to demonstrate that we've got a very much decreasing trend in nitrogen dioxide concentrations across the city. In the first year, we've had a 21% reduction in our annual mean levels compared to our baseline year in 2019. And also as well, we've been able to prove that there's been a 22% reduction in those levels outside the zone. And that's quite important for us because we had a lot of feedback from people saying, well, you're only going to improve air quality inside the zone. What about outside? But of course, the idea is that you're trying to bring about that change in the use of compliant vehicles. So it's not only inside the zone, it's the vehicles coming towards the zone as well, where hopefully that air quality will improve. And on our website, you can read our various monitoring reports. We've just issued an annual report, which is very detailed. And there's also a summary report as well if you don't want to read it all, but it makes very interesting reading about all the things that we've been able to follow over the course of our first year. So in summing up, has it worked for us? As an environmental professional who's been trying to improve air quality in the city for 20 years, I would say yes. However, I think each city, and there are now quite a few that are going to be introduced in clean air zones, Bristol being one, every city has a different problem and a different problem to solve. So not one solution is going to fit every city. Obviously, clean air zones were brought in to deal with one particular pollutant, nitrogen dioxide. That was the focus. Particulate matter, I would suggest, is now the pollutant that we need to be focusing on. And the public need time. As I said, this is different, and they need time to understand why we have clean air zones and what they're there to do. And I'm pleased that now that there are others coming on board, I think there will be greater awareness of what they're here to do. I think for me, as I said, something significant needed to happen, and the introduction of the clean air zone for us raised the profile of air quality locally, and it focused political interest for us, and it brought it up there, it brought it up the agenda. We've had challenges along the way. Being the first to launch, we didn't intend that to be the case, but being the first to launch, we've come up against the issues. We've overcome them and we've managed them, and it's been really pleasing that we've had that support at our senior management level and political administration to make this happen. Having the clean air zone has brought us funding that we wouldn't normally have had, so that's been really beneficial, and we are now able to put any surplus funding into local sustainable transport projects, which we are now starting to do. And having had those painful conversations about behaviour change, it's given us a platform to have further conversations. So we're now talking about decarbonisation. Do people actually need to make the journey in the first place? And those conversations are now a lot easier because we've had the clean air zone in place. So we're still very much in the early stages. It's only been a year, but as someone who has been involved in delivering the scheme, for me, it's generating improvements that we wouldn't have achieved if we hadn't had a clean air zone in place. So that's a very quick trot through. If you want to email me with further questions or talk about it further, there's my email address. Happy to correspond with people, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Catherine. Fantastic. There's I've got a couple questions straight away, while we allow others to add any to the Q&A section. One opinion questions, maybe it's slightly controversial. What's your opinion when it comes to the carrot and the stick approach that you talked about? I love that carrot sort of analogy that you gave, that you have to provide those benefits that come from the charging that you'll be bringing in as a result of the people paying to enter. You've also proven the benefits, and we've seen the same in London, improvements inside and outside of the scheme. So do you think we should be doing more? Do you think we should be pushing harder with the stick in order to create more carrot and more wider benefits for cities across the UK?
Yes, I know where you're going with this. I think for our zone, and I can only talk about our zone, we wouldn't have had the success we've had without those incentives. You need to have a balance. You need to provide those little pots of money just to help people make that change. And we've had some really positive feedback from businesses that have benefited from that, and they're now actually using it as a USP for their business. They're saying, we have compliant vehicles with the clean air zone, we are contributing to improving air quality in Bath, and that is lovely to see, because they have become advocates for us. So and also you need to have that engagement with people. I guess we're fortunate in that we're small enough in terms of the zone in the city that we can have those individual conversations. Cities that are larger, bigger zones may not have that luxury, and I think that's been really beneficial for us as well.
And you can take the lessons learned there and in your area and apply them elsewhere. And do you think that the lessons you have learned and the proof you've provided will actually perhaps go further to say, let's do more of this and perhaps more quickly next time?
I mean, obviously we are in contact with all the other cities that are in development or have live zones. We share our learnings. We've shared with them what's worked and our approaches. So, for example, we had a soft enforcement period when we launched. We didn't recover the penalty charge for about 2 months. So people just had to pay the zone entry charge. That elicited a lot of positive feedback for us, and also helped people get that change into their heads. All the other live zones have now adopted that approach as well, and they're seeing the positive benefits from doing that. So it has to be an incremental approach. It's not going to be an overnight change. No, and you've just got to have the tenacity and the patience. Stay with it.
And have you seen a modal shift or a decrease in traffic at the same time?
That's difficult to pick out, because we launched as the pandemic was ending, so traffic flows have been really fluctuating. What is interesting is because we have ANPR cameras, we can also look at the car fleet, even though we don't charge cars. And we can see an upward trend in compliance in cars as well. So I think there's a subliminal message there, that people think, oh, I need to take a bit more responsibility here. I need to think a little bit more. We're also seeing an increase in the number of electric vehicles coming into the zone. And again, that's not something we particularly promoted, but again, that's interesting, and that's great for nitrogen dioxide, possibly not so much for particulates, but it's these other, I guess, indirect changes that we're seeing that we're looking at very closely, and the government teams are also looking at as well. And that can be shared with other cities that are thinking of introducing these zones.
Thank you. And one last very quick question. Was there any changes to the method of monitoring for NO2? That's from an anonymous.
I suppose what we have done, I wouldn't say changes, but we have very much increased our network of NO2 monitoring through diffusion tubes, mobile monitors like Zephyrs, and our continuous analyzers, because we wanted to demonstrate the before and after. We now have a lot more sites where we have triplicate diffusion tubes to improve that accuracy. So if you go to our website, you will see that network, and there's lots of data there, and you can see the decrease in trends.
Fantastic. Well, we are at time. We did just have two other quick questions come in. One about a backlash in relation to charging scheme as a result of the current cost of living crisis, and one about having huge polluters comply with, do you think we should be doing more for those big polluters? Maybe one that you could just drop a answer to in the Q&A, just to keep us on time. But thank you so much again.
Thank you
for your talk today. Absolute pleasure to hear from you. Okay. Thank you all, and thank you for those questions. We're going to move on to our next section now, which is the panel discussion. The way we're going to have this run is we have several speakers lined up today. We've got Andrew Fraser-Urquhart, Andrea Lee, Rob Day, Lauren Salisbury, and Helen Venn. And I'll introduce each of those one by one and allow them to give a few minutes to talk through the questions that we've put to them today, which were, what should be done about the updated targets and policy, and what does that mean in practice? And how does the sector respond? And do the current targets go far enough? So all of that in context of today's topic around practical solutions. It'd be fantastic to hear from these experts. And I'm going to open up the floor for Andrew Fraser-Urquhart, who is a QC, practicing planning, environmental and compulsory purchase law, and he specialises in housing, regeneration, minerals, nationally significant infrastructure projects, energy, waste and renewables, as well as all aspects of compulsory purchase. So a fantastic person to be able to give his thoughts on this topic of air quality today. So Andrew, over to you, please.
Well, good morning, everybody. Very interesting to hear some practical thoughts there about Bath and how their clean air zone is progressing as these zones begin to be rolled out across more and more, perhaps one might describe medium-sized cities across the country. Being someone who's migrated to the edge of the Peak District, my nearest big town, less its little cotton socks, is Stoke-on-Trent, where a new clean air zone is being proposed. So this is very much a topic for everyone, rather than the people who sort of tend to be a bit London centric and thoughts that everything flows from London. It's very far from that now. It's often a saying that what markets in a financial context hate most is uncertainty. And at the present, that perhaps is the word that sums up where we are in terms of at least the legal developments which are likely to come forward in this area. We've just had, obviously, the Environment Act, after a long period of delay, has been enacted into law with the creation of the Office of the Environmental Protection, the introduction of an attempt to have environmental targets. But we've also had coming forward in the Levelling Up Bill changes to the environmental impact assessment regime. And this is one of the areas which, again, has to be thought about quite carefully in respect to air quality targets, because where major development comes forward, clearly assessment of air quality impacts is a significant part of the EIA process. And with that being tentatively at least suggested to be replaced by environmental outcome reports, it may well be that there will be a further tightening of obligations on major developers coming forward through that process. So with the combination of a consultation period about the air quality targets, the suggestion from the government that what it was minded to target primarily was PM2.5s, and nothing directly else, no consideration of the component parts of PM2.5, but just a single target, which was at sort of twice the level of the WHO target. What we're seeing now is a period where this consultation process, which often, as with modern legislation, is important for actually defining what the effects are going to be, we see a period of great uncertainty. Whilst I don't make any suggestion of being sufficiently scientifically qualified to comment on the adequacy of the targets, I think it is important to note that at the moment, we don't quite know what we're going to be required to do. And the other matter, of course, is the practicality of enforcement. The clean air zones is obviously a very useful addition to the armory of bringing down levels of air quality problems where they exist. But beyond that, much lies in the hands of local authorities, and at a higher level, much will lie, as Helen will tell us in due course, no doubt, the newly created Office of Environmental Protection. With respect to the latter, perhaps Helen will tell us more, and we'll learn where they're up to. But as yet, with that body not having really come on stream yet, we don't quite know how their approach is going to play out to the exercise of the powers they have. And we all know of the pressures on local authorities in terms of resourcing to perform even core functions, and therefore matters which might be regarded by some as rather more discretionary by way of enforcement powers are likely to be under considerable strain. So it's important, I think, when looking at this debate, not to have it in isolation of those practical factors, because I suspect they may be some of the most important in actually determining what progress we make. And that, I suspect, will remain the case, notwithstanding the fact that, not least due to cases brought by Client Earth and other associated environmental bodies, that there is a ramping up of the legal pressure in this area. But as always, in a practical world, one has to be aware of sometimes a disconnect between legal obligations and practical outcomes, and that sort of missing link almost is the enforcement powers and the ability of government bodies actually to take the necessary steps and follow through to bring about real change. So I know it's a hated position, but the answer perhaps to a lot of these questions is don't know, tell you in a couple of years. And that's really, I suppose, where we get to on the legal sort of perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's always slightly terrifying trying to interrupt a QC. But appreciate that thought. I'd like to hand over to hear from Andrea Lee now. Andrea is the campaign and policy manager for clean air at Client Earth, and she's been instrumental in a lot of the fantastic work they've been doing to push the governments and improve air quality over the last 15 years.
Cool. Thank you very much, and really interesting to hear from all the speakers so far. Yeah, I think it's important to remember that this is just really a unique opportunity that we have at the moment to set an ambitious pathway to achieve clean air for all across the country. And so Client Earth, alongside our partners from the Healthy Air campaign, we really welcome the opportunity for setting more robust legal targets to drive the much needed action. And as has already been mentioned, the importance of legal targets to drive action and either ensure that the governments act, and where they fail people in protecting their health, that we are able to enforce and push this thing along. And I think that the history of the cases that we have brought forward has shown, in fact, that very often that sort of disconnect that Andrew, I think, mentioned between what's in law and what's needed, it's also with the political will, because the UK government could have acted sooner, could have done much more, could have got us to meet the current legal limits of air pollution if it wanted to, but it has over the past decade very much dragged its feet in this matter. But going back to what we're here to discuss at the moment, so the new opportunity brought by the Environment Act, and what does this mean in practice? I mean, I agree with Andrew. There is a lot that is still unknown. However, what is clear is that the government needs to go further. It's always important to remember that the reason that we're doing this, the reason that we care about this issue, is because it's affecting people's health and their quality of life right now. It's making some of our towns and cities not the great places that they should be for people to be raising their families, working, living out their lives. And as Brendan mentioned earlier, air pollution causes and exacerbates inequalities that we really need to get a grip on. The proposal that the government has put forward in this consultation really fails to respond to the seriousness and the urgency that this public health emergency needs. The government is proposing to give themselves 18 years to meet guidelines that were set by the World Health Organization back in 2005, and gives no real indication as to how they will proceed towards meeting the WHO's most recent recommendations from last year. And this is despite the fact that their own analysis of what they've published so far, because they've not showed us everything, suggests that reducing the concentration of PM 2.5 to 10 micrograms per meter cube is achievable long before 2040, and actually could be achieved by 2030. And instead of levelling up, the government proposals also increases the risk that blue skies will get bluer, whilst people living in areas that already suffer the worst levels of air pollution could actually be left behind. This is particularly worrying when we remember that it is often those from lower incomes and ethnic minorities that live in the most polluted areas. The government also seems to be adopting the least ambitious scenarios and taking a very pessimistic approach. And again, it's worrying when their own analysis just suggests that simply meeting existing legal commitments, such as the National Emissions Ceilings Directive, will do a lot of the work in achieving the target by 2030. However, obviously many people will have seen the report by the National Audit Office last week, which highlights how the government isn't on track to meet its legal commitments, and it's not doing enough to protect people. And this raises another concern over the next part of this puzzle. So the environmental improvement plan. So this will say how the government will meet whatever target it sets, and this needs to be finalised by January 2023. Yet, in the current consultation, there's very little insight into how the government is going to be acting and meeting whatever targets it does set. And there is concern about whether, what engagement and what public consultation is going to happen around these environmental improvement plans. The time is really running out on the timelines that the government has set itself in terms of setting the new regulations for the targets by the end of October, and creating and publishing the finalised environmental improvement plan by January 2023. So again, like Andrew, there's still a lot of questions that have been left unanswered, and we really hope that the government does the right thing and shows the ambition for protecting people's health now and not in 18 years' time.
Fantastic, thank you, Andrea, and great to hear your thoughts on that topic. And it's also good that Brendan was echoing the request to complete that consultation, which is coming up for closure soon. So let's get these points across to the government. I'd like to hand now to Rob Day, Senior Policy and Public Affairs Officer at Asthma and Lung UK, who are fighting for everybody's right to breathe. Rob, good to see you again, and look forward to hearing your thoughts on this topic.
Thanks, James. And yeah, as you say, so I'm here from Asthma and Lung UK, and we're the nation's lung charity, and as part of that, we are fighting for everyone's right to breathe. And what that means is we provide services and health advice to people with a lung condition, whatever that lung condition is, but we also tackle prevention and try and prevent people from developing lung conditions in the first place. And actually, air pollution contributes to kind of both of these things. We know that air pollution is damaging everyone's lungs, but also it is really damaging the quality of life for people living with a lung condition today. Brenda mentioned that there are certain kind of health disparities. And actually, we know there are some groups that are more at risk from the impact of air pollution. That includes children, includes pregnant women, includes actually babies in the womb, the elderly, and people living with a lung condition. And we saw kind of the very unfortunate, the ultimate price that this and the impact that this can have, with the death of Ella Adukasi Deborah, who died in 2013 as a result of the high levels of air pollution near where she lived, and their kind of the factor that they played in her kind of final asthma attack. And at Asthma and Lung UK, we hear from our beneficiaries every day of the impact that air pollution is having on their life, the very kind of similar impact, the fact that they often feel out of breath just when they go outside, they feel wheezy. It makes it really difficult for them actually to leave their house on certain days. And our recent report, Alerting the Nation, found that up to 3.4 million people across the UK with a lung condition have had their symptoms triggered by air pollution. So it's caused an asthma attack or a COPD flare-up, for example. And this is not right. This is really impacting and damaging people's quality of life, and is not acceptable. And so we're trying to do as much as possible to change that. And these targets will play a central role in doing that. And all of the work set out under the Environment Act should play a central role in doing that. Andrea mentioned the work that the Healthy Air campaign have been doing, and we're actually part of that as well. So it will come as no surprise that we also are slightly underwhelmed, or very underwhelmed, by the target dates, and particularly, as Andrea said, the fact that we're looking to get to the concentration target by 2040. And that is, again, as Andrea said, because research has shown we can get there by 2030, or definitely before 2040. And why this is so important is that ambitious targets are central to catalysing activity across the country. James, you mentioned that there's no kind of silver bullet for tackling air pollution, and we need activity right across industry, across all levels of government, across driving consumer activities, and across kind of behaviour change. And so setting ambitious targets now will kickstart that work, and kickstart that kind of holistic work. And just to kind of finish off with going on to that question about, do the current targets go far enough? We've, alongside other partners, been running a kind of tool that helps people to respond to this consultation, to kind of try and gather as many responses as possible, to cut through the kind of slightly technical jargon, to really explain what PM2.5 is, and what these targets can do. And on that, through that tool, we've already gathered well over 5,000 responses. So I think what this shows is that people are really engaged, are really interested in this, and do want to be kind of seeing action sooner, and seeing kind of action driven as quickly as possible. And so we don't believe the kind of targets currently go far enough, and we would like to see more activity. But we do look forward to kind of working with the government, particularly as they look to kind of review the air quality strategy, and seeing how that will kind of all work together to protect people with a lung condition first and foremost, but then protect everyone's lungs over the long term.
Thank you, Rob. Fantastic. And next, I'd like to hand to Lauren Salisbury, Principal Air Quality and Policy and Project Officer at Brent Council. Lauren leads the air quality programme, which has included lots of fantastic actual practical solutions that she's been putting in place whilst working in this role, such as first cargo bike trials in the borough, green screens at schools to protect children in the playgrounds, and help rolling out monitoring of over 30 school street schemes. So Lauren, look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, James. Thanks for the introduction. The first question we were asked to consider is, do the new targets set out in 2021, do they need to go further? Just to start off by saying, I think it's really positive that we've got new targets, and that those targets are more stringent than what we've had up until now. The current objective is, of course, 20 micrograms per cubic metre, and one of the proposed targets halves that. That's a good thing and a step in the right direction. But in my role as an air quality officer in a local authority, I work to reduce air pollution to protect the health of people in our community. So for those people, in my view, it's that we do need to be more ambitious, and the targets need to go further to meet that aim. I mean, of course, evidence on the health impacts of particulate matter show we need to reduce levels as much as possible, as quickly as possible, which I know has already been said by the speakers before me on to some degree. Interestingly, just to draw out a local example in Brent, I commissioned a community outreach programme, a bit of research recently, where we spoke with a representative sample of Brent residents, and a third of the people we spoke with said that they had personal experience of health problems they said have been made worse by pollution in their local area. Of course, it will be more than that have had impacts, most likely, but that's quite a stark statistic to show that we do need to be taking action to protect the health of our local people. And as Andrea suggested, there is good evidence to show that the target of 10 micrograms per cubic metre could be met by 2030. I'm sure many of us in the room will have read or seen the really important work done by Clean Air Fund and Imperial College London, which they published in a report called The Pathway to Healthy Air in the UK. And that shows that a target of 10 could be achievable by 2030 if policies already in motion are implemented. So not only is this quick action needed, it is also possible to achieve with policies with strong political will and by bringing behaviour change on board as well and winning the hearts and minds of the public. So I think the target year of 2030 is the least that we could be asking to be delivered. And especially just to reiterate the fact that there clearly is an impact on residents within my own local authority, and so it's for those people in particular that I would stress the importance of that. In terms of how can new targets be met by local authorities, that was another question we were looked to asked to consider. And of course, local authorities are undoubtedly key players in reaching and hopefully ultimately exceeding the targets. But of course, we can't do that alone at all. I think the Act recognises that to some degree, both by stating that the responsibility for meeting the PM 2.5 targets will sit with national government, but also by stressing the importance of air quality partners in the development of air quality action plans. So that's really welcomed. Going back for a moment to the Pathway to Healthy Air report for a moment, as I said, they found that if existing policies are implemented, then less than, I think it's 0.2% of the UK will exceed 10 micrograms by 2030. Of course, it's a big if about implementing existing policies. That requires political will, it requires funding, especially if local authorities are to play a strong enforcement and community engagement role as well. That will need to be backed up. I think local authorities can help to move closer to the targets by being ambitious, for example, in our active travel programmes, encouraging walking and cycling, lobbying for tighter restrictions in relation to domestic burning. They have a really important role, as Catherine has shown, with engaging residents and businesses on these issues. But ultimately, we need strong political will, collaboration, funding, underline that one, as well as strong, coherent communications as well. And I really think that strong communications from national government as to why these measures are needed could be really beneficial in helping authorities to get the message across to local residents. I think it's already been touched on already in terms of challenges to the Environment Act and what challenges the Environment Act creates. I think it's been mentioned already about the challenge with enforcement of the new Clean Air Act guidelines and smoke control area guidelines. Perhaps we'll touch on that more in the question and answer sessions. But I think overall, we really welcome the more stringent, I would say my view is that I welcome the more stringent, I can't think of the word, sorry, word's gone out of my head. The more stringent targets, that's the word, thank you. And particularly to protect the health of our local residents. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lauren. I'd like to hand next to Helen Venn, who's Chief Regulatory Officer at the Office for Environmental Protection. Helen's bringing to the OEP a strong legal background and over 20 years of regulatory experience of investigation and enforcement. So going to be having a key role to keep people on track over the next few years as these pieces of legislation get enforced. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you, James, and good morning all. If I could start by just saying a little bit about the Office for Environmental Protection, because we're a new public body, we're already using the acronym OEP, legally created in November 2021, but actually gaining our powers and publishing our strategy and our enforcement policy today. No launched investigations as yet, but watch this space. So our mission is to protect and improve the environment by holding government and public authorities to account. And these organisations include government departments, government ministers, regulators, local authorities and some private bodies. And we're covering England and Northern Ireland. So we've got 4 key functions to do that. So we will be scrutinising environmental improvement plans and targets, and I'll just say a little bit more about that shortly. We'll be scrutinising environmental law, we'll advise government on environmental law, and we can enforce against failures to comply with environmental law. So we'll use our powers and duties to make the greatest contributions we can to environmental protection and the improvement of the natural environment, and of course this includes the protection of people, which is key to today's conference. I did want to draw attention to our 25-year monitoring report that was published last month. So have a look on our website. It's called Taking Stock of the Work Needed Now to Protect, Restore and Improve Our Environment, because in that we provided advice on target setting. So we highlight how targets crystallise goals. So I concur with previous speakers that they're a positive and would welcome them because they enable they enable targets to be operationalised, progress monitored, which is key because it's all about delivery. We do argue that targets should be statutory, so more likely to endure, to drive investment and delivery. And we recommend that the 25-year environment plan goals have lead targets as well, so apex targets. And we did press for clear, coherent hierarchy of targets. So it's already been mentioned that this consultation on the targets is due to close on Monday, the 27th of June, and we will be publishing our advice in relation to that consultation the week after next. But I can say that we've looked at the targets from a framework of comprehensiveness, coherence, which has just been mentioned. I think that's critical, but also ambition and delivery assurance. Because however ambitious, however coherent, unless we've got delivery assurance, there's going to be significant issues in achieving the goals. Now, in terms of the OEP, we have an explicit duty to monitor progress with the statutory targets. So each year we'll lay before Parliament our independent view, and that will include whether we believe government has made sufficient progress. So if our regular scrutiny doesn't do the job and targets are missed, then we'll consider whether it's appropriate to use our enforcement functions. I was going to go on to say a little bit about enforcement functions. So in addition to our scrutiny role, we do take complaints. We can act upon complaints in relation to investigations. We can self-initiate investigations. And our approach is designed to challenge and resolve failures without recourse to formal court proceedings where we can. We heard earlier about the carrot and the stick approach. I have heard colleagues refer to it as the cup of tea and stick approach, but we'll see how that holds up. So we can use kind of the usual enforcement powers around court proceedings, judicial review, we can intervene, but we can also instigate an environmental review, which is a new enforcement power for us. Wherever we get a resolution, we'll publish results, and we can sorry, I said we can intervene. So we can take a variety of steps on enforcement. I wasn't going to say any more other than in relation to local authorities, of course, we are fully aware of the constraints, of the need for coherence, the matters outside of local authorities' control, continued funding pressures, for example, inadequate traffic management powers for some. And I was really interested to hear the public awareness, the public awareness work with Bath, for example, because I think that's key. And I think creating that coherence across the piece to achieve the targets is not only challenging, but it is essential. So that's all I was going to say this morning, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers on the panel who have given their thoughts already this morning. So we're going to move to questions now, and we've had one in. So I'd like to start by putting this question to Andrew. Could I encourage relatively short responses, just because I'd like to allow hopefully everybody to come back with some more answers as we go through. So first question is around the legal points that Clienter took the government to account on previously. Could it be argued that they could be taken to court again based on not meeting the air quality strategies, or is there a difference from a legal standpoint?
The short answer is there isn't a difference from a legal standpoint, in the sense that the vehicle for any challenge in this area is going to be an action by way of judicial review. And in the client earth litigation, the fact that there were specific set targets was clearly a benefit to establishing illegality, even using that vehicle of judicial review. Where it comes to a challenge on wider issues, so this was, I think, the question was directed at the clarity of targeting and clarity of methods of achievement. It becomes, I think, quite hard, because judicial review is actually a fairly limited weapon in terms of the grounds of challenge that are open to you, and more particularly the ability of a public authority to provide information and defences which are strong enough to meet the judicial review threshold. The idea being, in JR, you're primarily establishing that the decision maker has not had regard to some relevant factor, or has had regard to irrelevant factors, and those, in their very broader sense, are the grounds of judicial review. Judicial review is not a good weapon for challenging the merits of a particular decision, because that's usually regarded as being left to the discretion of the decision maker to come to an appropriate decision, as long as, I say, as they've had regard to the right factors. So legal basis the same, but practicality of achievement probably rather more difficult, because of the absence of some tangible set standard against which one can compare public bodies' actions. That's about as short as I can do. I am a lawyer.
And I think that same question, in a way, Helen, relates to a lot of the work that you'll be responsible for. How can you use your cup of tea and stick approach, and which balance will you take? Will it be much more cup of tea or a bit more of a stick?
So obviously the lawyer's answer is it could be both, but as I said, we'll try and resolve initially without recourse to court action, but we won't hesitate to take enforcement action if that's appropriate. So we do expect authorities to rectify non-compliance. I think Andrew's just talked about judicial review, so we can take environmental review via the High Court. So that enables the court to determine the matter in law. I think one of the challenges for us as a new public body is to ensure that people understand our role. So we're not an ombudsman. We're looking at those strategic issues. It's a small organisation. There's about 50 or so people at present, with a huge remit across England and Northern Ireland. But as I say, we've got the judicial review that Andrew's touched upon. We can intervene if that's appropriate, but the environmental review, obviously untested, but we wouldn't hesitate to move to either judicial or environmental review if there wasn't rectification of non-compliance through our kind of cup of tea approach.
I mean, I see Andrew's trying to come in, but let me just make this one point, and Helen won't thank me for it, but the reality is that as a public body itself, the Office of Environmental Protection may well find itself on the receiving end of challenges rather than making challenges, with the ability being there for interested parties to challenge the actions that the office either takes, or I'm desperately trying to get the phrase OAP out of my mind. It's OIP. But the ability of people to challenge the actions, or in some cases inactions, and begging Helen's pardon, but we'll have to see how this develops. One shouldn't overlook the fact that the office itself may well be on the receiving end of challenges rather than bringing them. Sorry, Andrea, I jumped ahead of you.
No, interesting point. Andrea, yes, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I just wanted to come back on the original question, just to kind of be clear that, the client earth challenges were never about the specific content and policies of the government. In fact, the first challenge that we brought about was purely because the government, I mean, the government accepted from the beginning that it was failing to meet these legal limits, but the actual legal framework allowed it to then draw up air quality plans to show how it was going to then act to meet them in the shortest time possible. And originally there was a limit of meeting them by 2015 at the latest. The reason that we ended up, after having dialogue with the government and asking them what they were going to do when in 2010 they failed to meet those legal limits, because we did talk to them. We don't just jump to doing legal challenges without having conversation first, is that they refused to actually draft up those plans and that they needed to do to show how they were going to act once they had already admitted that there was a breach. And unfortunately the government decided to not take the legal steps that it was committed to doing through the legal framework that it had agreed to. And then the subsequent challenges were because it was quite evident that if they were applying the legal test from the legal framework, they would be doing much more ambitious action and actually not doing things like setting arbitrary deadlines for when they were going to comply and the such. So just to be clear that, you know, client earth challenges were never about specifics, policies and such. It's purely, as Andrew was explaining, judicial review only allows you to challenge how the decision was made, and 3 times the courts found that the government had failed to make those decisions in the lawful manner.
Absolutely. And do you think then, just to close this one out, that the government is opening itself up to further risk of challenge in future?
I mean, that's really kind of how the sort of the frameworks are set up, and at the moment our view is that the Environment Act provides quite a few loopholes for the government if it fails to comply with targets to get around this, which, you know, it's sad that the government feels like it needs to do this. What we hope is that when it sets its targets and it sets a bolder target than what it's currently proposing, that it will just act in the interest of the public, because as we've heard from Rob and Lauren, you know, this is actually really affecting people's lives, and dragging their feet and pretending that they can get away with business as usual and not doing anything is not good enough. So, you know, we hope it doesn't come to that, and we just hope that they just take the action that they need to do.
Absolutely, that's the key. And to bring in Lauren on this, you've got the A406 that runs through the centre of the borough. We heard earlier about partners and National Highways being a key partner there. How do you feel that, in terms of a hierarchy of measures, working with partners and that actual setup is going to work in practice? Do you feel that's going to bring forward the benefits that are required?
I think it will be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, obviously, councils already work in partnership with highways authorities, TfL in London, so that partnership already exists to a good degree, from experience. So I think this just puts onus on that relationship and encourages conversations to keep going and to put more strength behind air quality action plans which get put together. It would be hard to say whether it will result in the changes needed. I think you're right, but the A406 within Brent specifically is a really key concern of mine. It's one of the main exceedances within the borough, and I'm very conscious that we have residents living along both sides of that road. So it will be a key priority of mine personally to work with partners to try and do that. And I think we have, of course, at the moment within London, the ULEZ expansion out for consultation. So there are other policies which will hopefully help to reduce those currently illegal exceedances. So we'll have to watch this space and see what policies are implemented and what changes they bring, and continue working with partners to try and affect that change.
Absolutely, thank you. And Rob, we've seen, I mean, I personally have seen a real increase in funding from altruistic organisations like yourselves, in Global Action Plan with their Clean Air Day, etc. We've heard a bit of need funding at a local level, at a national level as well. Excuse me. How do you feel the government is responding to the need, and is it because of organisations like yourselves that we're seeing this evidence being built? Is there a gap perhaps that needs to be closed in terms of the information that the government provides and the information that's needed?
Yeah, thanks. So I think there is currently a gap. I think in terms of the evidence that's there, the evidence base is very comprehensive. We know the damage that air pollution is doing to people's health. We increasingly know how much damage it's causing to all organs of the body. And we also have the data there to know where the main exceedances are, to be able to monitor and to be able to model very kind of advanced modeling as to kind of where pollution hotspots are. And I think what we're seeing as a result of that evidence base is this action being taken by government and all the work that is being done, where the kind of and where all the evidence is being done across all levels of government. Really, you know, the fact that we've got more and more local authorities with people like Lauren focusing on air quality and really kind of tackling it at a local level as well. Where I think the next step, or where the gap in that sort of information is coming, is often in kind of raising awareness within the public of what is needed. And I think this is a kind of a holistic picture when it comes to kind of information. One thing that would be really useful and potentially really impactful would be a kind of national awareness raising campaign about air pollution, so people know the impact that it is having on everyone's lungs and know the types of people that are more at risk, as I said in my kind of initial opening. And that would just really help to raise awareness, as I say, but also would make delivering some of these policies like clean air zones, where you're going in with the stick, that stick would be softened immensely when if people actually had the full information. I think similarly we've seen the kind of wood burning. A lot of conversations we have when people realise the damage that burning wood is having on public health, both outside their home but also inside their home as well. That is a real shock to them. You know, there just isn't quite that knowledge there of the real damage that the wood burning is having and the air pollution is having. But then I think more specifically when it comes to what could be termed kind of vulnerable groups or people that are more at risk, particularly those people with a lung condition that we speak to, is the information about those kind of about the damage that can be done, but also what they can do to mitigate their exposure. And one thing that these targets don't focus on, but we know the government are focusing on elsewhere, is short-term kind of peaks in air pollution. There's the target to reduce exposure, but also there is more work being done on how information about kind of short-term peaks can be given to people. And I think this short-term episodes is really kind of one around the crux of the quality of life issue. It's those short-term exposure that our beneficiaries are walking outside their front door and the air kind of, you know, is triggering their symptoms, or is kind of, you know, making it really difficult for them to breathe. They're having to kind of sit down. And at the moment, our main health advice on that is to avoid main roads at rush hour, to maybe take back roads if you can and things like that. And that is one of the kind of best things they can do at the moment. But that obviously is, even if they can do that safely, is limiting their kind of way of life as well. And for some people that may just not be possible if you either live on a main road, as Lauren just suggested, or if your shop is on a main road, that might not be possible. And so the information around what can be done, but also more information around air pollution levels at a kind of almost road by road basis, is something, or on a personal basis, is something that would really improve the ability for individuals to kind of manage their own personal exposure, as well as the work that's being done to kind of reduce national exposure generally.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. Looking at the time, I think we're due to finish up at 11:05 today. So I'd like to thank again the panelists for joining today and for all of your thoughts. I think that's given us a real indication of perhaps some of the uncertainty that exists, some of the need to respond to the government, and also hearing from Helen as well, from how the government is going to be held to task, and the likelihood of the action that they will be able to have as a very important role in future. So yes, absolutely fantastic to hear from you all, and thank you very much again for your thoughts today.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd
Thank
like to take the opportunity then really just to wrap things up. One thing I should mention that our host reminded me of is that this session will have been recorded, and we'll be able to share this recording with you all afterwards. So from my perspective, a lot of the work I do is at Arup is in the built environment and looking at the planning regime and major infrastructure projects. But one thing that we're also doing is very much thinking about the type of sectors that are perhaps falling behind or not improving as quickly as others. So as we see things like vehicles getting cleaner and the transition to electric vehicles, other sectors will inevitably become a bigger piece of the pie in terms of the total proportion to emissions. So looking at the construction sector, for instance, and the requirements from non-road mobile machinery, how do they need to be improved? How do shipping emissions need to be looked at as well in future? And all of these questions need to be tied together. And as I said at the very beginning, there's not really one solution to any of this, because it's behavioral change, it's industry, it's transport, it's a whole range of different sectors that need to come together. And it was great to hear from Brendan at the start about some of the awareness raising they have been doing, and I know Rob was pushing for more in that area, but it was good to see some of the tools that Defra are creating. And it really seems like, to me, we are moving in the right direction, but actually perhaps we need to come back to that question that Client Earth, really brought to the fore around what can be done in the shortest time possible, and are we doing enough? And I think that really then leads to the final question of what is next and what can be done. And from my perspective, it's practical solutions that will create the improvements that we need to see, and whether those are creating better cycling and walking infrastructure to make those behavioural changes more feasible and more realistic for the average person, and also to be able to share the information that's required to make those day-to-day changes actually acceptable and understandable. And it was great to hear from Catherine on the fantastic work they've been doing in Bath to reach out to the community to make that invisible issue more visible for everybody. And I think it's going to be an interesting few months and weeks as we move from the consultation into implementation in the longer term. And I think Andrew's going to be busy with lots of interesting legal challenges, and we've seen the type of thing that can occur around the Wilden case, the Dutch nitrogen case, for instance, and challenges as we move from EIA into environmental outcomes. And from my perspective, again, working on lots of nationally significant infrastructure projects, I see that as a positive, and where I hope things will move will be much more towards the air quality positive methodology. So let's take our projects and work out what these schemes can do to really improve air quality just on their own, and make that a requirement through policy and planning law. All of that, I hope, will bring about the changes that we've talked about today. So once again, I'd like to thank our speakers today, and I believe we are just about at time. So thanks to all who have joined and listened in. I saw plenty of you there in the numbers. So I hope you've enjoyed and found this a useful session, and keep your eye out for future waterfront conferences as well in future. I think they do a fantastic job of organising great speakers and great events. So thank you all, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.